The sound of the wind through the canyon was a low, ghostly moan, like the land itself warning what was coming. Dust hung in the air, shimmering in the dying light, and every living thing seemed to hold its breath. Eli Graves stood on the ridge, his coat flapping like a flag of defiance against the blood-red sky. Below him, across the valley floor, 50 Comanche riders waited in silence. Faces painted in bone white, feathers stiff in the wind, horses restless beneath them. They didn't shout. They didn't move. They were patience itself, waiting for him to make the first mistake. He spat the dust from his mouth, thumbed the hammer of his Colt and muttered under his breath, "Guess this is how the story ends. But let's go back to where it all started." 2 weeks earlier, the plains had been quiet, too quiet for Eli's liking. He'd been driving cattle south toward Fort Richardson, just him, his horse, and the endless horizon. The world was a canvas of gold and rust, with the sun sitting low like a brand over the edge of the earth. He wasn't a lawman anymore, not since the army called him a troublemaker and a moral risk. He'd fought for them during the border wars, scouted, tracked, killed when ordered. But after what he'd seen done to villages that couldn't fight back, he'd walked away. Now he worked alone, chasing peace that never quite stayed. That morning he'd stopped by a watering hole near the Pecos to rest his horse. The air smelled of sage and dust. His reflection in the water looked older than his years. Sun-cut lines around the eyes, a scar through his beard from a knife fight he never talked about. He was leaning to fill his canteen when he saw the buzzards, 3 of them circling low to the north. He squinted, hand shading his eyes. Something was wrong. He rode hard toward it. When he reached the ridge, he found the remains of a wagon train, burnt, twisted, the ground littered with blackened wood and scraps of fabric. The air still carried the bitter tang of smoke and blood. He dismounted, his boots crunching through ash and silence. Then he saw her. A woman, pale, trembling, sitting beside a dead horse. Her hands were tied, wrists raw. Her blue dress was torn, face streaked with dirt and tears. She looked up when she heard his steps, eyes wide and hollow. "They took him," she whispered. "My boy, please." "They took him." Her voice broke on the word boy. Eli knelt beside her, untied her wrists. "Who? Comanche," she breathed. "They came at dawn. Killed the others. They said they'd keep him alive until for trade." Her eyes met his, wild with desperation. "You're a scout, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. Please, please help me." Eli didn't answer. He just looked out toward the horizon, that endless sea of grass and wind where the Comanche moved like ghosts. He knew what it meant to follow them. It wasn't a chase. It was a death wish. He tied his horse's reins and said quietly, "Where was he taken?" She pointed east, toward the broken mesas that glowed red in the afternoon light. Eli nodded once. "All right, but you ride light and quiet. No crying, no fires. If they see smoke, we're both dead." She tried to thank him, but he cut her off. "Save your breath. We ain't out of this yet." As they rode, she told him her name was Clara. Her husband had been a trader out of Abilene. They'd been heading for a new life in Santa Fe. Now she was a widow with nothing left but a prayer and a child somewhere in the wild. Night fell over the plains like a blanket of ash. The two made camp under a rocky overhang, a small fire hidden behind stones. The stars were fierce and cold above them. Clara sat wrapped in Eli's old coat, staring into the flame. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked. Eli didn't look up. He just poked at the fire with a stick. Because no one helped the last ones. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't have to. In the distance, a coyote howled, long and low. And somewhere far beyond that sound, another voice answered. Eli lifted his head. He recognized that rhythm. The sound of war drums carried thin on the wind. He stood slowly scanning the horizon. The plains were dark and empty, but he could feel it, the same way a man feels the storm before it breaks. He looked down at Clara. "Get some sleep if you can," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we start riding into hell." The drums echoed again, faint, steady, patient, as the fire flickered low and the prairie fell back into silence. By dawn, the air had turned cold and sharp. The horizon bled red over the mesas, as if the sun itself were wounded. Eli saddled the horses in silence. The woman, Clara, watched him with hollow eyes, the kind that hadn't known sleep in days. They rode east, the land rising and falling like waves frozen in dust. Every so often, Eli dismounted to study the tracks, hoofprints, light and swift, bareback riders. The Comanche were moving fast, but not fast enough. "Can you still read 'em?" Clara asked softly. Eli grunted. "Some things you don't forget, no matter how hard you try." They crossed a dry riverbed by noon. Buzzards circled high, lazy and black against the sun. Eli squinted. There were drag marks along the bank and one smaller set of prints among the horses. A child's feet. His jaw tightened. Clara slid from her horse and knelt by the prints. "That's him," she whispered. "Please tell me that's him." Eli didn't answer. He just nodded once, his silence heavier than any words could be. By afternoon they reached an old cavalry outpost half swallowed by sand. The timbers creaked in the wind, the flagpole bare, its rope clattering softly. A single figure sat on the porch, an old man with a rifle across his lap, hat pulled low. "Didn't expect to see no riders from the east," the old man said as Eli approached. "Are you lost or just stubborn?" Eli stopped at the steps. "Need water and a place to rest the horses. You seen any Comanche bands passing through?" The man's eyes sharpened. "Plenty. Too many for a man to go riding after." "You know what you're doing, cowboy?" Eli's tone was flat. "Looking for a boy they took." The old man spat into the dust. "Then you're looking for a grave." Clara stepped forward. "Please, sir, my son's alive. They said they'd trade him." The old man looked her over, pity softening his voice. "Ma'am, they'll trade him if you got something worth trading. Otherwise—" He trailed off. "You should both turn back. There's nothing out there but ghosts and bones." Eli reached for his canteen, took a slow drink, and said quietly, "'Tain't the first time I've walked among 'em." The man sighed, shifting his rifle. "You do what you gotta, Graves. But you know what'll happen if the army catches wind of this. They're looking to start a fight, not end one. You help her and they'll call it treason." "I quit taking orders a long time ago," Eli said. The old man nodded grimly. "Then may God walk with you, son. 'Cause no one else will." By nightfall, word had spread through the settlements. Eli Graves, the ex-scout, was riding into Comanche country with a white woman and a death wish. At a way station near the edge of the prairie, they stopped to buy supplies. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and old sweat. A few ranch hands sat by the stove, playing cards and muttering under their breath. When Clara walked in, all conversation stopped. A bearded man at the counter leaned forward. "You're Eli Graves, ain't you? Heard you're helping a woman chase Injuns." He said the word with a sneer. "That true?" Eli laid $2 silver on the counter for bullets and jerky. "Ain't your concern," the man laughed. "It'll be your grave, though. You go helping their kind, or hunting 'em without the army's blessing, and you'll bring trouble down on everyone here." Clara stepped up beside Eli, voice shaking. "He's not helping them. He's helping me." The man's smile faded. "Lady, that makes it worse. You think them Comanche care about your story? You think they'll give that boy back? You're gonna get this man killed, and maybe us too." Eli turned, slow and deliberate, eyes cold as the steel on his hip. "You done talking." The room went still. After a long pause, the man muttered, "You'll wish you'd listened when the smoke starts rising." Eli took the bullets, slung his pack, and pushed open the door. The sun outside was low and blood-red again, throwing long shadows across the dirt road. As he helped Clara mount, she said quietly, "They all hate you for helping me." He adjusted his hat, eyes on the horizon. "They don't hate me," he said. "They're scared of what happens when a man does the right thing." They rode out into the darkening plains, leaving the murmurs of the town behind. Somewhere out there, beyond the mesas and the dry wind, the Comanche were waiting, and now everyone, white settlers, soldiers, and tribes alike, knew Eli Graves was coming. The next time he met another man's eyes, it might be through the smoke of a gun barrel. The night wind carried the sound of drums again, closer now. Not a warning this time, a promise. The sound came first, faint, rhythmic, echoing off the canyon walls like the heartbeat of the earth itself. War drums, slow, deliberate, getting closer. Eli Graves crouched on a rocky ledge overlooking the valley, the moon cutting a silver scar across the land. Below, a line of campfires burned low, flickering in the darkness. The Comanche were here, 50, maybe more. Their horses stood tethered in silence, heads low. They were waiting for dawn. Behind Eli, Clara trembled, clutching the fabric of her torn dress. "Are they Are they going to kill him? Eli didn't answer. He was staring through a spyglass, his face unreadable. Then after a moment he said quietly, "They ain't killed him yet." She moved beside him, following his gaze. Near the central fire she could see figures, shadows moving, one smaller than the rest. A boy tied to a post but alive. Her hands went to her mouth. "That's my son." Eli lowered the glass. "We move at first light. We try anything now and we both die before we reach the bottom." Clara grabbed his arm. "They'll trade, won't they? If I go down there, if I offer myself, maybe—" Eli turned sharply, his voice like gravel. "You walk into that camp and they'll take you too. That's not a trade. That's a death sentence." Tears welled in her eyes, but he looked away. There wasn't room for softness tonight. Not with the drums still whispering through the hills. He checked his rifle, loaded each round with slow precision, hands steady as stone. His eyes had that faraway look again, the one that came from too many wars, too many ghosts. "I've seen this before," he murmured. "Different valley, same fire. Army came through after, said it was victory, but the ground was full of bodies that didn't need to die." Clara's voice broke through the stillness. "So why do this again?" Eli glanced at her, his face illuminated by the cold moonlight. "Because maybe this time somebody walks away." When the sun finally broke over the canyon rim, it came like a blade of gold across the dust. Eli and Clara rode down slow, hands visible, no guns drawn. The Comanche saw them coming before they even reached the flats. A dozen riders appeared from behind the rocks, silent and stern. Their faces were painted with red streaks, eyes like flint. Eli dismounted, lifting his empty hands. "We come for the boy," he said, his voice low but steady. One of the riders, a tall man with eagle feathers braided into his hair, looked him over. He spoke in Comanche, then in broken English. "White men bring war to our people. Why you come here now?" Eli met his gaze. "Not for war, not for land, just the child." The warrior's expression didn't change. "You killed Comanche before?" Eli didn't flinch. "Yeah, I did. And I ain't proud of it." The man studied him for a long, tense moment, then gestured for two others to bring the boy forward. Clara's breath caught in her throat when she saw him, dirty, shaking, but alive. The Comanche leader stepped closer. "You want him?" "I'll give something." Eli frowned. "What do you want?" The man pointed at Eli's gun belt. "That iron death. You give, you leave. You no come back." Eli hesitated. The colt on his hip was more than a weapon. It was survival, the one thing between him and an early grave. Clara whispered, "Please, Eli, just give it to them." But Eli's instincts screamed caution. Something wasn't right. The Comanche weren't smiling, weren't relaxed. They weren't afraid of him. They were waiting for something. His eyes drifted toward the ridge behind them. That's when he saw it, glinting in the sunlight, steel, rifles, dozens of them soldiers. A patrol had followed them. The cavalry, Eli's stomach dropped. "Goddamn fools!" he hissed. The Comanche leader followed his gaze and stiffened. For a heartbeat, both sides were frozen. The whites on the ridge, the Comanche in the valley. Eli standing between them. Then the first gunshot cracked through the morning. The boy screamed. Horses reared. Clara fell to her knees. The air exploded into chaos. Eli dove, dragging her down behind a wagon wheel as bullets tore through the dust. He shouted toward the soldiers, his voice hoarse with fury. "Ceasefire! Damn you, stop!" But it was too late. The valley was burning again. Smoke, screams, and the thunder of hooves filled the air. He turned to Clara, eyes blazing. "You stay down. Don't move." Then he ran toward the boy. Bullets hissed past his ears as he fired back at the ridge, not at the Comanche, but at the fools who'd started this slaughter. The boy was only a few yards away when Eli felt the world lurch, a shot grazing his shoulder, tearing through his coat. He staggered but kept moving, scooping the boy into his arms. The Comanche leader watched him, stunned by the madness of a man who would risk his life to save a child, not his own. Eli looked up through the smoke, blood on his sleeve, fire in his eyes. "Tell your men to hold," he shouted. "We can still stop this." But the leader didn't answer. The valley had already chosen its fate, and as the sun rose higher, the war drums were drowned beneath the roar of gunfire. The valley was a storm of gunfire and dust. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the air burned with smoke and blood. Eli Graves moved like a man possessed, a shadow between death and duty. He ducked behind a shattered wagon, clutching the boy to his chest. The child's face was streaked with soot and tears. "It's all right, kid," Eli rasped, though he knew it wasn't. "We're getting out of this." Clara was still where he'd left her, crouched behind a fallen log, eyes wide and fixed on him. A stray bullet struck the dirt beside her, throwing grit across her face. She didn't even flinch, just stared at Eli as if the sight of him was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. From the ridge, the soldiers kept firing, blind, panicked, deaf to any command. Eli saw their officer waving his hat, yelling orders lost to the wind. The Comanche fought back in silence, their arrows cutting through smoke like whispers of vengeance. And in the middle of it all stood the Comanche chief, tall, unmoving, watching the madness unfold with eyes like obsidian. Eli knew that look. It was the same one he'd worn years ago, after the army's so-called victory near the Red River, the look of a man watching something holy burn. He lifted his rifle high above his head, shouting over the noise, "Stop shooting, damn you! There's a child down here." No one listened. Another bullet whined past, grazing his hat. He ducked, cursed, then turned to the Comanche chief. "You want him alive? Tell your men to stop." The chief's voice cut through the chaos, calm, clear, terrifyingly controlled. "You bring army. You bring death." Eli shook his head, chest heaving. "I didn't bring 'em. They followed me. They ain't my people no more." The chief's expression flickered. Confusion, disbelief, then something colder. He shouted something in Comanche, and slowly, hesitantly, his men began to fall back behind the rocks. The gunfire from the ridge lessened as the soldiers saw the movement below. The smoke began to thin, and for the first time in what felt like hours, silence started to return. Eli stepped forward, still holding the boy. "No one else needs to die today," he said, voice rough. The chief's dark eyes stayed locked on him. He raised his hand, and with a single motion, every remaining Comanche lowered their weapons. Eli did the same. He set the boy down gently, pushing him toward Clara, who stumbled forward and wrapped her arms around him, sobbing. But the moment of peace was fragile, too fragile for a world like this. From the ridge came the sound of horses descending, the cavalry moving in. Their officer, a clean-shaven man with cold blue eyes, rode down at full gallop. His face was red with fury. "Graves!" he shouted. "Stand down and hand over the prisoners!" Eli turned slowly, dust swirling around him. "They ain't prisoners, Captain. They're survivors!" The officer reined in his horse, glaring. "You have no authority out here. Those savages killed settlers on the border. They're wanted men." "They were defending their home," Eli said quietly. The captain's eyes hardened. "You've gone soft, Graves. I heard about you. Court-martialed for insubordination, defending hostiles. Thought you'd learned your lesson." Eli stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "I learned plenty. Learned that men like you don't see what's in front of them. You just see enemies." The captain's jaw clenched. "That's enough." He turned to his men. "Arrest him. And if any of those Comanche resist, shoot them." The air went still again. Clara gasped, clutching her son tighter. The Comanche bristled, fingers brushing their bows. Eli raised his hand, palm open to both sides. "Nobody fires," he said softly. "Not today." He took a step toward the captain, the sun catching the blood on his sleeve. "You want to take me in? Fine. But you leave them. You'll have to go through me to get to them." The captain hesitated, eyes flicking between the Comanche warriors and the man standing alone in the dust. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Comanche chief stepped forward, lowering his weapon. He spoke in halting English, his voice carrying the weight of something ancient. "This man, not your enemy. He fight for peace. We see it." The captain blinked, thrown off balance. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Eli looked at the chief, a flicker of mutual respect passing between them. Clara's tears fell silently onto her son's hair as the sun broke through the smoke, turning the valley gold. And for the first time since it began, the gunfire truly stopped. Eli holstered his weapon, chest rising and falling like he'd just outrun death itself. He looked at the captain one last time. "You call yourself the law," he said. "But out here, the land decides who's right." The captain said nothing. He just turned his horse and rode back toward the ridge, the rest of his men following in uneasy silence. The Comanche watched them go. And when the dust settled, the chief gave Eli a single nod before disappearing into the hills. Only then did Eli let himself breathe again. He turned to Clara and the boy. "It's over," he said softly. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Nothing ever ended easy on the frontier. Peace was just the space between storms. 3 days later, the plains were quiet again. The sky had that washed-out blue that comes after a storm, and the earth smelled of ash and new wind. Eli Graves rode slow, his arm in a makeshift sling, the wound from that day still burning when the cold set in. Clara and her boy followed behind him on a borrowed horse, their shadows stretching long across the prairie grass. They hadn't spoken much since the valley. Some silences didn't need breaking. They all carried too much of what had happened, too much they couldn't unsee. When they reached a ridge overlooking the river, Clara pulled on the reins. The horse stopped, tossing its head. She looked out at the water, calm and glimmering, winding through the red stone like a silver thread. "This'll do," she said softly. Eli turned in the saddle. "For what?" "For starting again," she said, voice thin but steady. She helped her son down and took his hand. "I don't know what comes next, but it can't be running anymore." Eli watched her for a long moment, the wind lifting the edge of his hat. Then he nodded once. "Good a place as any." The boy, Daniel, stepped closer to him, shy and unsure. "Mister," he said, "you gonna stay?" Eli managed a faint smile. "I don't reckon I'm the staying kind, kid." Daniel frowned, confused. "But you saved us." Eli's eyes softened. "Sometimes saving folks means letting them live their life without you in it." Clara stood quiet beside them, tears glinting in her eyes. "You don't have to go, Eli. You could come with us. Help us build something." He looked out toward the horizon, that endless, open wound of the west. "Ain't much I'm good at building." "Clara, everywhere I go, trouble follows close behind." She took a step toward him. "Maybe that's because you keep riding alone." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The wind moved around them, soft as breath. Then Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch, one of the Comanche tokens the chief had left behind after the fight. Inside was a single carved stone, marked with 2 crossing lines. "What's that?" she asked. "Peace mark," he said. "Means paths meet again. He gave it to me when I was lying half dead. Said someday I'd understand what it meant." He handed it to her. "Maybe you'll figure it out before I do." Clara closed her fingers around the stone, holding it like a prayer. "I already have," she whispered. Eli turned his horse east. The morning sun caught the dust rising from his boots, gilding the air in gold. For a moment the boy ran after him, calling his name, voice cracking through the stillness. Eli stopped, half turning in the saddle. "Mind your ma," he said gently, "and stay clear of soldiers." The boy nodded, eyes full of something that looked too much like love for a man like Eli to carry. Then he rode on. By nightfall, he'd reached the canyon's edge again, the same place where it had all begun. The fires were long dead, but the ghosts lingered. A hawk circled overhead, the only witness left to what had been done here. Eli dismounted, letting his horse drink from a shallow pool. The stars were just beginning to come out, sharp and cold. He knelt by the ashes of a fire, sifting the dust through his fingers. Beneath it, half buried, he found something, a Comanche arrowhead, its edge still sharp, glinting faintly in the moonlight. He turned it over in his hand, then tucked it into his pocket. "Reckon that's the land's way of remembering," he murmured. The wind moved through the grass, whispering over the bones of the earth. Somewhere far off, a coyote sang. Eli sat there a long while, staring into the darkness, the line between guilt and peace too thin to name. When he finally rose, the night had gone utterly still. He swung into the saddle and turned his horse north, toward the mountains, away from the noise, the wars, the people who couldn't see past the color of skin or the ghosts of the past. The land stretched before him, wild and endless, and though no one was there to see it, Eli smiled, just barely, as the dawn broke behind him, painting the plains in light. Somewhere out there, the Comanche chief was watching the same sunrise, holding the same quiet hope, that maybe the blood they'd spilled had bought something better than revenge. 2 men on opposite sides, both scarred by the same dirt, now bound by one truth. That peace ain't something a man finds in treaties or gunfights. It's something he earns, one mercy at a time. And as the horizon opened wide before him, Eli Graves rode on, not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as a man finally learning how to lay his ghosts down in the dust.